Welcome to After the Risk. And here back in the studio we have Dr. Brennan Kredell. So to start things out, what is your opinion as an American on the Canadian film industry?
It's a great film industry. I think it's a lot different than the context that I am familiar with growing up in the States. And it's always interesting to me to hear my students talk about Canadian film because my sense is actually that Canadians have probably a lower opinion of Canadian film than they should. That there's a sort of stigma attached to domestic production here that I, as an outsider, don't quite understand, because I actually think of all of those amazing films that have come from Canada over the years. But so much of the industrial structure is different, sources of funding vary so much between the two countries, that despite the fact that there's so much sort of interplay between the industries, people working in Hollywood, people working here in Canada, when you look at how the industry is put together, it's night and day in some respects. To say nothing, of course, of the difference between English Canadian and French Canadian film. So endlessly fascinating for me, and something that I'm still learning as I go. It's one of the most exciting parts of what I do.
Now, taking that in mind, looking more local, what are your thoughts on the studios being built outside of Calgary and Calgary's growing film industry?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, it's really important. You can't play baseball if you don't have a field. Americans have to make baseball analogies, you understand, to just about everything. And it's the same thing with film. It's really hard for filmmakers and for that matter for TV here in Calgary to engage in any kind of long-term planning about what the industry is going to look like in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years without having the kind of facilities that you need in order to make this work. And I know that this has been something that's been dreamed about for many years here in Calgary, and it seems as if it's finally going to happen. So this is good news. And I'm hopeful that it will bode well for the future. But then at the same time, I also know that this isn't something like you add water and all of a sudden you've got yourself a delicious film industry. You can't build a film studio and then the next day expect to have a robust film industry. The studio is a prerequisite, but it's everybody that's here at NUTV. It's the human capital, as they'd say in the business world, that makes the industry what it is.
Wow. Now, you have a background in urban studies. Can you tell us how you think that translates over to film?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, one of the most interesting things about film, and here I'd say more generally the media industries in our present moment, is that cities across the continent have sort of faced this crisis within the last, I mean, you could say as much as 40 years ago, but certainly in the last 20 years, in that the industries that they had traditionally relied upon for jobs, for revenue, et cetera, have begun to move elsewhere. And instead, a number of cities, and in this respect we might count Calgary in this move to building the film studio here, have looked to media industries as a way to shore up the domestic industry and to create jobs in cities, to create economic impacts. Some cities have been more successful than others, and some cities have spent a lot of money, right? I mean, Toronto has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to make this happen. And so in this way, Calgary is sort of playing catch up. But I do think that there is emerging consensus that at least a robust creative sector is something that is absolutely essential to a thriving modern city here in North America.
Do you think we'd ever be able to compete on a level with Toronto in the media industry?
I mean, it's certainly possible, but you have to realize that Toronto has had a head start in that they have the schools in place to train people, they have the facilities in place to produce things, and they have the production companies in place to a much greater extent than we do in Calgary. So that's why I say before, I would caution folks here as to have unrealistic expectations about this studio. I think in the immediate term what this means is that we'll be able to attract some international productions that couldn't come here now because it's impossible to shoot on sound stages here. But this is a long game that we're playing, right? And to be able to develop infrastructure takes years, if not decades. But with this investment in a studio, and with the investment in training folks here at NUTV and all of the things the province is doing and the city is doing, I do think that there's at least a future where one could imagine Calgary being a media capital in the same sense that Vancouver and Toronto are.
Well, great. Well, thank you for that. And just to close things out, how would you describe success for you?
Success for me. Wow, that's the toughest question that you've asked so far. Success for me is being able to get up and go to work in the morning and being passionate about the thing that you get to do. I mean, everybody's got to find a way to pay the bills. Lots of us have to pay the bills doing things that we're not especially happy doing so that we have money to do things that we want to do. But I'm really lucky that I get to do something that I'm passionate about doing and spend time with people who make my work life a pleasure to be in. And so to that extent, you know, you were generous before in describing me as successful. I'm not sure if I would say the same myself. But I do think to the extent that I've had any success in life, it's that I get to do something I love every day. And that's something, unfortunately, far too many of us don't get to say. So that's success.
Well, thank you for coming in again.
Oh, thanks for having me, Eric. It's my pleasure.
For After the Risk, I'm Eric Stroppel. Remember to risk it for the biscuit.